While the entire world focuses on digital ransom notes demanding millions in cryptocurrency, federal investigators are quietly knocking on the doors of local construction contractors in Arizona. They are not asking about offshore accounts or complex hacking rings. They are asking about an empty and unremarkable house right next door to a crime scene. Why would an abandoned property hold the key to one of the most baffling disappearances in recent history? The contradiction in this case is completely staggering. On the surface, there is a loud and chaotic extortion plot capturing every headline across the nation. But just out of the public view, detectives are meticulously piecing together physical evidence that suggests a terrifyingly quiet and intimate crime. The extortion emails might just be a smokescreen designed to pull the attention of the media away from a far more sinister reality. We are looking at a case where the visible noise completely masks the invisible terror. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has even executed a court-authorized search warrant hundreds of miles away near the border of Mexico. They are tracking a shadow, a suspected phantom who managed to slip into a highly secure neighborhood and vanish without leaving a trace of digital footprint beyond one final and chilling video frame. If you want the unsealed case details and step-by-step forensic breakdowns, make sure you hit subscribe and join us here at Crime Files with Liam. We are going to strip away the wild internet speculation and look strictly at the confirmed facts. We will examine the exact timeline of that very night. We will analyze the specific forensic markers left behind. And we will explore the terrifying possibility that the true motive has nothing to do with money. This is not just another missing person investigation. This is a masterclass in misdirection. The suspect meticulously planned every single step of this abduction, but no matter how careful a criminal tries to be, they always leave something behind. Sometimes it is a piece of fabric, sometimes it is a drop of blood, and sometimes it is the glaring absence of evidence where evidence should logically be. The quiet, empty house next door might just be the most important piece of evidence of all. Are you ready to step behind the yellow tape and see what the authorities are really looking at? Let us begin the forensic breakdown. 84-year-old women living alone in highly secure neighborhoods do not typically become the focal point of a meticulously planned tactical extraction. They live quiet routines. They attend online church services. They rely on daily heart medication to stay alive. The life of Nancy Guthrie was defined by this exact kind of predictable safety. She resided in the affluent area of Catalina Foothills in Tucson, Arizona. It is the kind of community where neighbors know each other and security systems are standard. The mother of the famous television anchor Savannah Guthrie lived a life completely insulated from the violent realities of the criminal underworld. Yet someone was watching her. Someone was studying the quiet rhythm of her days. The timeline of her daily activities was being mapped out by a predator waiting for the perfect window of opportunity. That window opened on the final night of January. At exactly 9:50 in the evening, her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her back to her house. The Bunn authorities have confirmed that he was the last known person to see her safely inside the residence. He dropped her off, ensured she was secure, and drove away. The police have entirely cleared him of any involvement and officially removed him from their list of suspects. When his car pulled out of the driveway, Nancy was completely alone. The house was quiet, the doors were locked, the exterior was monitored by a Nest doorbell camera. There was absolutely no reason for alarm. But the presence of her daily heart medication resting on the counter established a terrifying biological clock for what was about to happen next. Every single hour she was separated from those pills significantly decreased her chances of survival. A kidnapper taking an elderly woman who is dependent on prescription drugs is introducing a massive and completely unnecessary complication into their own operation. They have to move slower. They have to manage a physically fragile hostage. It defies every logical pattern of a standard home invasion. A typical burglar wants to get in, grab high-value items, and get out as fast as humanly possible. They do not want to manage a human being, especially one whose failing health could turn a kidnapping charge into a murder charge in a matter of hours. The level of risk involved in removing Nancy from the house was astronomical. This means the perpetrator was not acting on a random impulse. They were executing a very specific and targeted mission. They knew exactly who was inside that house. They knew she was elderly. They knew she was alone. And they decided that taking her was worth the extreme risk. Between the moment her son-in-law drove away at 9:50 and the early hours of the morning, the quiet street remained completely undisturbed. There were no sounds of breaking glass. There were no loud voices or signs of a physical struggle echoing through the Catalina. Foothills neighborhood, the security perimeter of the home seemed to be functioning perfectly. The only anomaly in the dead of the night was the silent and sudden failure of a single piece of technology. A digital eye that was supposed to stand guard over the property simply went dark. There was no chaos. There was no noise. The only unusual event during those dark hours was a Nest camera quietly losing its connection at exactly 1:47 in the morning. This was not a system glitch. This was the exact moment the perimeter was deliberately breached by an intruder who knew how to remain entirely unseen. The morning of February 1st broke with an unsettling silence. Nancy had a very strict routine that her family and friends knew well. She was scheduled to log on and attend a virtual church service online. When the stream began and her designated user profile failed to appear in the digital congregation, immediate concern began to ripple through her close social circle. It is a small detail, but in the context of forensic profiling, breaking a deeply ingrained routine is often the very first indicator that a violent disruption has occurred. People do not just abandon their deeply held spiritual habits without a reason. When her friends could not reach her by phone, they contacted the local authorities to perform a standard wellness check. Police officers arrived at the Catalina Foothills property expecting to find a medical emergency. They anticipated that an elderly woman living alone might have suffered a severe fall or a sudden cardiac event related to her known health condition. But what they found when they crossed the threshold completely shattered the theory of a simple medical crisis. The interior of the house was heavily ransacked. Drawers were pulled open and contents were scattered across the floor in a chaotic manner. At first glance, the scene strongly resembled the chaotic aftermath of a standard burglary. It looked as though someone had torn through the residence, desperately searching for hidden cash or small valuables. But a meticulous inspection of the property quickly revealed a series of deeply troubling contradictions that did not align with a typical break-in. The criminals who staged this chaotic scene made several massive psychological errors. They left behind the items that would logically be taken first in a robbery. Her cellular phone was still inside the house. Her purse, containing her identification and credit cards, was untouched. Even her vehicle remained parked exactly where it was supposed to be. Furthermore, the essential daily items she would need to survive were left behind. Her crucial heart medication remained exactly where she had left it the night before. If Nancy had willingly left the residence for a sudden emergency, she absolutely would have taken her phone, her purse, and most importantly, her life-saving pills. The physical evidence painted a terrifying and impossible picture. The intruders had clearly spent time destroying the interior of the house to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. They wanted the police to believe that this was a random crime of opportunity. Yet they did not actually steal the most valuable and easily transportable items in the home. Instead, they stole a human being. They navigated an elderly, physically fragile woman out of her own home in the middle of the night. They managed to transport her away from the property without raising any alarms from the neighbors. The sheer logistics required to move a non-compliant 84-year-old hostage in the dark are immensely complicated. It requires transportation, it requires a secure location to hold the victim, and it requires a level of physical control that drastically increases the probability of leaving behind biological evidence. The criminals went through all of this extreme effort and assumed this massive operational risk, but they left the purse and the car behind. The scene was staged. The ransacking was a deliberate misdirection designed to waste the time of the investigating detectives. They wanted the initial police response to focus on tracking stolen property instead of tracking a stolen person. The gap between what the scene looked like and what had actually happened was massive. Every single minute that passed while the officers documented the fake burglary was a minute the kidnapper used to put more distance between themselves and the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. The perpetrators did not take the valuables because money was never the primary objective. The real target of this operation was always Nancy herself. The ultimate question haunting investigators inside the home was simple and terrifying. Why would anyone go to such extreme lengths to abduct an 84-year-old woman from her own bedroom? The criminals did not take the most valuable objects in the house. The only thing they took with them into the dark was an elderly woman who was fast asleep. Why? While the physical crime scene inside the house offered nothing but staged confusion, the digital perimeter held a massive secret. The federal authorities knew that the security camera had lost connection at 1:47 in the morning. But in the world of modern digital forensics, a disconnected camera is almost never completely dead. Devices like the Nest doorbell continuously upload fragmented packets of data to cloud servers, even if an intruder physically smashes the device or cuts the local internet routing cables. Residual data from the milliseconds right before the first day. Destruction is often permanently preserved in the cloud architecture. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately subpoenaed those digital cloud logs. They were looking for the exact physical moment the feed was interrupted. The forensic technicians managed to pull a final fragmented video file that the suspect likely believed was entirely destroyed. What the recovered video frame revealed was the most chilling evidence of the entire investigation. Out of the total darkness of the Catalina Foothills night, a figure emerged directly onto the front porch of the victim. The federal authorities have officially confirmed the details of this digital capture. The image shows a suspect who appears to be an adult male. He is estimated to stand somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall. His face is completely obscured by a heavy mask. But the most revealing detail in the grainy footage is not the face of the intruder, it is what he is wearing on his back. The suspect is clearly carrying an Ozark Trail hiker pack with a 25-liter capacity. This specific detail completely rewrites the psychological profile of the perpetrator. A burglar searching for loose cash or jewelry does not strap a high-capacity wilderness hiking backpack to their body before breaching a residential front door. That specific piece of gear is designed for carrying heavy, bulky loads over long distances. It is a tool chosen by someone who knows they are going to need significant storage space, or someone who needs to transport specialized equipment into a hostile environment. This was a man who came heavily prepared for a complex operation. The camera footage proves that this was not a desperate addict looking for a quick score. The suspect moves with deliberate tactical precision right up to the lens of the camera before the digital feed violently terminates. He knew exactly where the camera was positioned, he knew exactly what the blind spots were, and he knew exactly how to physically neutralize the digital sentry before it could capture a sustained recording of his entry. The timing is equally terrifying. He struck at 1:47 in the morning. This indicates that he had likely been observing the house for a significant period. He waited until the lights were out. He waited until the neighborhood was completely asleep. He waited until he was absolutely certain that Nancy was defenseless. The presence of the masked figure with the tactical backpack changes everything about this case. This was a highly targeted hit to help us spread awareness about this suspect and this specific 25-liter backpack. Please take a second to hit the like button right now. Engaging with the video forces the algorithm to push this investigation into the feeds of more viewers, which drastically increases the chances that someone might recognize the gear or the physical build of the suspect. Every single like genuinely helps the investigation reach new eyes. The authorities now had a physical description of the phantom who breached the porch, but they still had to explain how he managed to leave the area with a hostage without leaving a massive trail of chaos. He disabled the camera perfectly, but the perfect crime is a myth. The suspect thought he covered every angle. He thought the mask and the disabled camera would keep him anonymous forever. But even the most disciplined and tactical operators make critical mistakes when their adrenaline spikes. He was careful with the camera. He was careful with the house. But he was not careful enough. Somewhere in the darkness during his escape, The Phantom dropped something, and that single mistake would blow the investigation wide open. This was absolutely an abduction, and the suspect was ready for it. The entire trajectory of the investigation shifted the moment the crime scene technicians processed the exterior of the house. During their initial sweep of the property, investigators made a grim discovery right at the primary threshold. They recovered physical evidence directly outside the front door that immediately escalated the severity of the case. Forensic analysts identified traces of biological material on the porch. According to the official press releases from the major news networks, laboratory testing quickly confirmed that the recovered biological material was an exact match for the DNA profile of Nancy. This physical evidence proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that a violent physical interaction had occurred before the suspect was able to transport the victim away from the residence. She did not leave the house willingly. The presence of her DNA near the very spot where the masked figure was recorded standing on camera established a horrifying timeline of events. The suspect had engaged her right at the boundary of her own home. But the discovery on the porch was only the beginning of the forensic trail. Investigators knew that the suspect had to transport an 84-year-old hostage away from the affluent Catalina Foothills neighborhood. They expanded their search grid in massive concentric circles, expanding outward from the residence. They were looking for any microscopic anomaly that did not belong in the environment. 2 miles away from the crime scene, law enforcement officers found something that broke the case wide open. Resting on the ground was a single black glove. It was an incredibly specific piece of tactical gear that closely matched the precise visual description of the clothing worn by the masked figure in the recovered Nest camera footage. A suspect who meticulously planned to disable a digital security network and stage a fake burglary inside a dark house absolutely requires gloves to prevent leaving fingerprint evidence behind. But in the chaotic adrenaline rush of the escape, the Phantom lost control of his own physical inventory. He dropped one of the gloves 2 miles away from the extraction point. This single piece of discarded fabric was immediately secured in an evidence bag and rushed to the Federal Crime Laboratory for advanced molecular analysis. The suspect had worn the glove to protect his own identity, but inside the dark fabric, forensic technicians found exactly what they were hoping for. They successfully isolated and extracted a complete DNA profile from the inner lining of the glove. The laboratory results officially confirmed that the DNA belonged to an unknown adult male. The authorities finally had the genetic blueprint of the Phantom. The biological signature of the kidnapper was locked in the federal database. The investigators had the face of the ghost hidden inside a genetic sequence, but solving a crime using biological evidence is never as simple as television dramas make it appear. The system returned absolutely 0 matches. The suspect had never been arrested for a felony offense. He was a complete ghost in the system. The discovery of the unknown male DNA profile was an incredible breakthrough. But without a name attached to the genetic code, it was essentially a locked door without a key. The Federal Bureau of Investigation realized they needed to deploy a far more advanced technological weapon to hunt down the suspect. They officially activated a genetic genealogy protocol. This is the exact same advanced forensic technique that was famously used to identify the Golden State Killer. Federal investigators began cross-referencing the genetic sequence with commercial ancestry databases. They are attempting to build a complex family tree based on the biological markers. By tracing the distant relatives of the suspect, they hope to eventually narrow the genetic branches down to a single living suspect who fits the physical profile seen in the video. The process of genetic genealogy is incredibly powerful, but it is also agonizingly slow. It requires months of meticulous genealogical research and complex mathematical probability analysis to identify a prime suspect. The authorities knew they had the biological identity of the attacker safely secured in a test tube. But the agonizing reality of the investigation was that Nancy was still entirely missing. The clock was ticking faster every single day. The genetic genealogy results were pending, but the detectives on the ground could not afford to sit and wait for a laboratory to hand them a name. They needed a physical direction to look right now. The glove was a fatal mistake by the suspect. But the lack of an immediate database match forced the police to turn away from the microscope and look back at the physical geography of the neighborhood. They needed a new suspect pool, and they were about to find one in the most unlikely place imaginable. The investigation was rapidly expanding, but the public narrative began to fracture into terrifying digital speculation. The internet and national media networks became completely consumed by reports of a highly sophisticated extortion campaign. The public focused entirely on the alleged existence of chilling messages sent to the family demanding massive payouts in untraceable cryptocurrency. These unconfirmed ransom notes transformed a quiet residential abduction into an international cyber thriller. Everyone was suddenly debating the logistics of blockchain transfers and the psychology of digital syndicates. But federal law enforcement operates on a fundamentally different frequency. They know that in high-stakes investigations, the loudest and most public element is almost always a carefully engineered decoy. The noise of the alleged digital ransom was designed to pull resources away from the physical world. While amateur sleuths analyzed encrypted emails, the official task force made a jarring and completely unexpected geographical pivot. They turned their attention away from the computer screens and drove deep into the harsh terrain of southern Arizona. Their target was the remote and rugged community of Rio Rico. This specific municipality sits directly against the international boundary with Mexico. Moving an abduction case to a border town instantly elevates the threat level to the highest possible tier. It strongly implies the authorities had actionable intelligence suggesting the suspected perpetrator was actively attempting to flee the jurisdiction of the United States. They were trying to utilize the porous nature of the border to vanish completely. The public was chasing digital ghosts while federal agents were kicking up dust in the desert. This massive divergence between the public narrative and the actual police work creates a profound sense of unease. Why would sophisticated cyber criminals be operating out of a rural desert outpost? The most terrifying answer is that the extortionists and the actual kidnappers were never the same people. The cryptocurrency demands could have been the work of opportunistic scammers exploiting a highly publicized tragedy from halfway across the globe. Or even worse, the digital demands were a brilliant tactical diversion orchestrated by the physical abductors to ensure law enforcement was looking at the internet while the victim was being smuggled across the border. The agents arriving in Rio Rico were not looking for computer servers. They were hunting a physical suspect who had breached a secure residence. The tension in the southern sector was immense because investigators know that once a hostage crosses an international line, the chances of a safe recovery plummet exponentially. They had to intercept the transport before that invisible boundary was crossed. If you have a theory about whether the digital extortion was a calculated smokescreen or the primary motive of the entire operation, please drop your thoughts in the comments section right now to help us analyze the different psychological profiles at play. The task force was operating on two entirely separate tracks, but the most shocking revelation of the entire case was not waiting in the desert. The operation in the south was about to trigger a chain of events that would force the entire investigation to snap violently back to the beginning. The agents in Rio Rico were executing a highly coordinated maneuver based on evidence that had not been released to the media. The true secret of this case was not hidden in the vast expanses of the borderlands. It was buried right back in the affluent neighborhood where the nightmare originally started. The border operation was merely a catalyst that would uncover a much darker and far more intimate discovery. The sudden shift south was a necessary tactical maneuver to rule out the worst-case scenario of an international escape. But as the agents combed through the intelligence gathered in the border town, they realized the architecture of this crime was far more localized than they initially feared. The phantom who orchestrated this abduction did not just drop out of the sky and vanish into the desert. He required a staging area. He required a place to observe his target without raising suspicion in a highly secure community. The digital ransom demands had successfully blinded the public to the most obvious question in any targeted attack. Where was the predator hiding before he struck? The answer to that question would fundamentally change everything we understand about residential security. The focus was about to violently shift from the international border back to a quiet suburban street. The authorities were preparing to uncover a blind spot so massive and yet so ordinary that it defies belief. The investigators knew they had to look closer to home. They had to strip away the distractions of the media circus and the alleged cryptocurrency demands. They had to return to the physical origin point of the crime and look at the environment with completely fresh eyes. The turning point of the entire investigation arrived when the federal authorities secured a court-authorized search warrant. But this was not a standard search of a known suspect. The Guardian confirmed that the authorities executed this critical legal maneuver on a specific property located in Rio Rico. They aggressively moved on the border location and even detained an individual for intense questioning regarding the disappearance. The execution of this warrant was a massive escalation that proved the police were acting on hard physical leads rather than internet rumors. However, the true explosive twist in this case did not occur at the border. The suspect in the South was questioned, but the interrogation did not yield the final answer. The real breakthrough happened when the investigative lens swung rapidly back to the original crime scene. According to reporting by News Nation, federal agents quietly returned to the exact neighborhood where the abduction took place. But they were not there to re-examine the victim residence. They began knocking on doors and asking neighbors highly specific questions about an abandoned and vacated property situated immediately adjacent to the crime scene. They were also reportedly collecting and scrutinizing lists of local construction contractors who had access to the area. This revelation is absolutely staggering. It completely shatters the initial theory of a random home invasion or a sudden breach by an outsider. If the authorities are investigating an empty house right next door, it means they suspect the accused perpetrator was using the vacant property as a tactical observation post. This is the stakeout theory. The masked figure captured on the digital camera did not simply drive into the neighborhood on the night of the attack. He had likely been living in the shadows right next door. An abandoned house undergoing renovations or sitting empty on the market provides the perfect camouflage for a predator. It offers unrestricted lines of sight into the daily routines of the surrounding residents. It provides a secure location to stash tactical gear like heavy capacity backpacks and specialized tools. And most terrifyingly, it allows a criminal to memorize the exact security vulnerabilities of a target without ever triggering an alarm. The contradiction of this case reaches its absolute peak right here. The entire world was distracted by the loud noise of million-dollar digital ransom demands, but the actual monster might have been quietly sitting in the dark just a few yards away from the victim. He could have watched the family members drive away in the evening. He could have patiently monitored the lights turning off inside the residence. He had all the time in the world to calculate the precise moment to disable the digital security perimeter. The use of a vacated property as a staging ground elevates this crime from a simple abduction to a terrifyingly sophisticated military-style operation. It implies a level of patience and psychological control that is rarely seen in standard criminal profiles. The suspected perpetrator did not just breach the house, he infiltrated the entire environment. The federal authorities executing the warrant in Rio Rico and simultaneously tracking down construction contractors in the original neighborhood suggests a complex network of moving parts. They are attempting to connect the physical suspect at the border with the silent observer in the empty house next door. This dual-track investigation reveals the true scale of the nightmare. The authorities are not just hunting a kidnapper. They are hunting a ghost who knows exactly how to exploit the invisible blind spots of modern suburban living. To make sure you never miss the upcoming forensic breakdowns of these newly unsealed warrants, hit that subscribe button right now and join the community. The revelation of the empty house forces us to completely reevaluate the safety of our own neighborhoods. Every vacant property or active construction site suddenly transforms into a potential threat. Vector. The predator did not need to hack a computer or break through a fortified gate. He simply walked into an empty space and waited for the perfect moment to strike. This chilling realization is the exact reason why the authorities are keeping the details of the warrant so closely guarded. They know the Phantom is still out there, and they know he understands exactly how to use the physical environment against his targets. The meticulous nature of this stakeout theory explains the lack of chaotic evidence at the primary scene. The suspect had the luxury of time. He mapped out his entry and his exit long before he ever set foot on the porch. The empty house provided the ultimate cover for the ultimate crime. The investigation had finally found the staging area, but finding the nest does not always mean finding the predator who built it. The explosive momentum generated by the border raid and the revelation of the abandoned house eventually collided with a devastating reality. The physical spaces were cleared, but the answers remained elusive. The authorities officially confirmed that the individual they detained and interrogated in Rio Rico was ultimately released from custody. The court-authorized search warrant provided crucial intelligence, but it did not provide the immediate rescue the family was desperately hoping for. The task force had successfully identified the likely staging ground, and they had mapped the escape route toward the southern border. They held the biological signature of the attacker securely in their laboratory. But despite all of this unprecedented forensic progress, the physical location of the victim remains a complete mystery. The investigation has entered the most agonizing phase of any true crime timeline. It is the period of lingering silence. The initial chaos has settled. The digital security cameras have been replaced. The crime scene tape has been removed from the neighborhood. But the profound absence of the elderly woman still haunts the community. The genetic genealogy process continues to run complex mathematical algorithms in the background, searching for a familial match that could finally put a name to the unknown male DNA. The authorities are playing a high-stakes waiting game against the microscopic evidence. Every passing day without a match amplifies the tension. The release of the suspect in the South proves that law enforcement is willing to act aggressively on any viable lead, but it also highlights the immense difficulty of building a prosecution in a case designed entirely around misdirection. The suspect meticulously staged a fake burglary to buy time. He allegedly utilized digital extortion emails to divert federal resources. And he reportedly used an empty house to mask his physical presence. He built a labyrinth of false clues. The police have successfully navigated through the smoke and the mirrors, but they have not yet reached the center of the maze. The residents of the affluent community are left to grapple with the terrifying knowledge that their highly secure enclave was successfully breached by a predator who knew exactly how to exploit their trust. The abandoned house next door stands as a silent monument to the vulnerabilities of modern life. The authorities have the genetic blueprint of the phantom. They have the timeline of the attack. They have the tactical gear he left behind. The only thing missing is the final piece of the puzzle that connects the biological evidence to a living, breathing suspect. The silence is heavy and suffocating. It is the quiet reality of an investigation that has done everything right, but still has not achieved the ultimate objective. The case is not cold. It is actively burning in the federal laboratories in the interrogation rooms. But until that genetic database returns a definitive match, the alleged phantom remains free. The family is forced to endure the agonizing space between knowing how the crime happened and knowing who is actually responsible for it. The resolution of this case will not come from a sudden confession or a dramatic chase. It will come from the slow and meticulous grinding of forensic science. The silence will eventually be broken by the results of a DNA test. But until that moment arrives, the empty house and the missing woman serve as a chilling reminder that some predators are patient enough to wait in the dark right next to the light. The entire community remains in a state of suspended animation. They watch the abandoned properties in their neighborhoods with a new sense of profound suspicion. The illusion of absolute security has been permanently shattered. The authorities continue to urge anyone with information about the events in Rio Rico to come forward, but for now, the investigation rests on the microscopic strands of biological material locked inside a federal vault. The wait is excruciating, the silence is deafening, and the question of where she is remains entirely unanswered. What this case teaches us about the evolution of modern residential crime is absolutely chilling. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in how targeted attacks are executed against vulnerable populations. The days of opportunistic criminals kicking in a door for quick cash are being replaced by highly calculated surveillance operations. This investigation exposes the terrifying concept of the physical digital footprint. The suspected predator believed he had erased his digital presence by physically destroying the security camera. But he failed to understand that residual data packets and cloud-based timestamp logs create an indestructible forensic record. Technology will almost always capture the exact moment of the breach. However, the true lesson here lies in the exploitation of urban environments. Criminals are increasingly utilizing the blind spots of affluent neighborhoods. An abandoned property or an active construction site is no longer just an eyesore, it is a severe security vulnerability. These spaces provide predators with unrestricted access to observe the daily routines of their targets. Without ever triggering a perimeter alarm, they transform a safe community into a tactical hunting ground. This case highlights the profound vulnerability of individuals living alone, even within the strongest fortresses of modern suburbia. A patient observer can map out every weakness and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The system is designed to keep threats out, but it completely fails when the threat is already living inside of the perimeter. We must begin to view vacant properties not as empty spaces, but as potential observation posts. The integration of advanced biological tracking, like genetic genealogy, is our best defense against these sophisticated operators. But until our physical awareness matches our forensic technology, the silent observers will continue to find places to hide in plain sight. The terrifying reality of this abduction is the meticulous patience of the predator. The idea that someone could be watching your daily routine from the dark windows of an empty house next door is enough to destroy any sense of personal safety. The authorities have the genetic code of the phantom, but the final answer might reveal an even darker truth. If the genealogy results eventually point to a suspect who has absolutely no personal connection to the family, we have to ask the most disturbing question of all. Who actually hired the Phantom to execute this flawless extraction? To stay updated on the genetic genealogy, results of this case, and other deep dive investigations, make sure you are subscribed to Crime Files with Liam. We will be tracking every new forensic development as soon as the court unseals the documents. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. The shadows in our neighborhoods often hide more than just empty rooms. They hide the patience of those who wish to do harm. Keep your eyes open and always question the anomalies in your environment. The truth is out there, waiting to be decoded. We will uncover it together.